Hi, Erica here. Thank you so much for your wonderful assignments. I really enjoy reading the weekly posts because I can see that you're coming to grips with different ideas about pedagogy and what pedagogy might mean. And in your reflections, I really gathered deep insights into how you think about pedagogy, power relations, and your own practice. So I think that's really wonderful that you've shared those, both the explanations of theory, but your insights into practice with me. So thank you. This week we're heading for our deep dive into power, the theories of power. So we've already looked at theories of pedagogy, and of course these have all been about power. Specifically, Freire is interested in notions of power as domination, some groups holding power over others, and people being disempowered through educational process and how to change that. Basil Bernstein's interested in language and power and institutions, whose language gets privileged in educational institutions like schools and universities, whose doesn't, and how that affects student achievement and progress. And how teachers teach and what teachers value. Foucault's always interested in power, and Foucauldian scholars, pedagogues are interested in how power works at micro levels in classrooms and universities and how that links to bigger pictures or bigger historical processes of power. And feminists are interested in power relations, the patriarchy and power, so notions of domination and in particular ways in which feminists can counter those relations of domination through habits of head, hand and heart. This week though, we're into power in a really kind of nuanced and deep way. And so we're introducing this week two very important ideas about power, which are structure and agency. And we can think about structure as social structure as enduring relationships which produce particular consequences. So in terms of social structure, we could think about the structures of institutions and how they exist over long periods of time, the type of power relations they create and the effects they have, for good or for bad, because institutions can have very good and productive effects or very bad effects, or differential kind of, effects which are both good and bad at the same time. You might think about it as enduring relationships or dynamics like gender as structure. So what are the enduring relationships around gendered relations in society? Who has power, who doesn't, the norm and the social norms associated with that. Or you might think about social structure as, the kind of formal structures in our society which govern us, like the law and the criminal justice system, the political system, things like that. So structure is quite a broad concept and people conceptualise it in different ways. Agency, on the other hand, really looks at, what power do people have themselves to act in the world, to be who they want to be, both in terms of the norms of social structures or that social structures propagate, but also in terms of subcultural norms, if they don't quite fit into the mainstream, or alternative norms. So what kind of power do people have to act in the world, to get what they'd like to get? Is there a tension between people wanting to enact agency, enact freedom to be an individual in their own right, and the power of social structures in our society? When do they come into conflict? Do people challenge through their agency social structures and enact social change on a wide scale in society through social movements, for instance, or through individual actions? And we often see social movements beginning at grassroots through individual action and building towards local and national and now global levels, particularly to enact change. And the Me Too movement is an example of that, an extension of feminism and feminist practice, which uses social media to enact change through individual agency and uses social media to do that in particular. So it's a really interesting example. So are we caught up in structures? Do we ourselves produce structures or maintain them as individuals or groups of individuals? and how do we resist or change social structure, and how difficult that can be actually. And schools are an institution which are part of, which reflects social structures and norms. Universities are the same. So I want you to think this week about, where do you sit on a structure agency continuum? Do you believe social structure dominates us all and we can't escape it, we can't resist it, we can't change it? Or do you sit in the middle of the continuum where, yeah, sure, I am influenced by social norms and structures, but I do my best to enact change when I can. Sometimes it's successful, sometimes it's not. Or do you sit on the far end where you think you're totally an individual who's totally free to act however you like, regardless of social structure and norms and institutions? So think about that continuum from being dominated by social structures to being able to enact change in the middle of the continuum with varying effects, to being a total individual who has total agency to enact freedom for themselves. Where do you sit on the continuum? And perhaps when we read through our theories of power, your ideas about power and where you sit on the continuum might change, and where your students sit on that continuum as well, and what the purpose of pedagogy and education is around social structure and agency. So thank you again for joining me on the course. I look forward to your weekly posts, and I certainly enjoyed your reflections.